Bilbo knew it. He had read of a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. So he stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So at last he crept behind a tree, and just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. "Ha!" thought he, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully out. "This is a beginning." It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. "Here! Who are you?" it squeaked as it left the pocket, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree.
"Blimey, Bert! Look what I've coped,"
said William. "What is it?" said the others, coming up.
"Lummy, if I knows. What are you?"
"Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit," said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him.
"A burra hobbit?"
said they, a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake, and mighty suspicious about anything new to them.
"What's a burra hobbit got to do with my pocket, anyways?"
said William. "And can you cook 'em?" said Tom. "You can try," said Bert, picking up a skewer.
"He wouldn't make a mouthful,"
said William, who had already had a fine supper.
"Not when he was skinned and boned."
"Perhaps there are more like him around about, and we might make a pie," said Bert. "Here, you, are there any more of your sort a-sneaking in these here woods, you nasty little rabbit?" said he, looking at the hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Yes, lots," said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. "No, none at all, not one," he said immediately afterwards. "What do you mean?" said Bert, holding him right away up, by the hair this time. "What I say," said Bilbo, gasping, "and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I am a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook, if you see what I mean. I'll cook beautifully for you, perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you don't have me for supper."
"Poor little blighter,"
said William. He had already had as much supper as he could hold. Also he had lots of beer.
"Poor little blighter. Let him go."
"Not till he says what he means by lots, and none at all," said Bert. "I don't want to have me throat cut in the sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks."
"I won't have it,"
said William.
"I caught him anyway."
"You're a fat fool, William," said Bert, "as I've said before this evening. And you're a lout, and I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins," says Bert, and he puts his fist in William's eye. Then there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, and calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them with a branch to bring them to their senses. And that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round, So there he lay for a while panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight up came Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off, one by one, to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately. "A sack, Tom! Quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was over his head, and he was down.
"There's many more to come yet,"
said Tom.
"or I'm mighty mistook. Lots, and none at all it is,"
said he.
"No border hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get right out of the light."
And so they did, with sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder. They waited in the shadows, as each dwarf came up and looked at the fire and the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton in surprise. Pop! Went a nasty smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Philly and Killy together, and Dori and Nori and Ori all in a heap, and Oin and Gloin and Biffer and Boffer and Bomber piled uncomfortably near the fire.
"That'll teach 'em,"
said Tom, for Biffer and Bomber had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad, as dwarves will when cornered. Thorin came last, and he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out of the sacks to tell him that things were not all well. He stood outside in the shadows some way off, and said,
"What's all this trouble? Who has been knocking my people about?"
"It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. They had forgotten all about him. "They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he.
"Oh, are they?"
said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch, all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some branches when Tom kicked the sparks up in Thorin's face. Tom got the branch in his teeth and lost one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at that moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were all in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squash them into jelly. And Bilbo up in a bush, with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they could hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they all agreed to it.
"No good roasting 'em now. It'd take all night,"
said a voice. Bert thought it was William's.
"Don't start the argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?"
said William, who thought it was Bert that had spoken.
"You are,"
said Bert.
"You're a liar,"
said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end they decided to mince them fine and boil them, so they got a black pot and they took out their knives.
"No good boiling 'em. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all,"
said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's.
"Shut up," said they, or we'll never have done, and you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more. Shut up yourself, said Tom, who thought it was William's voice.
Who's arguing but you? I'd like to know.
You're a booby, said William. Booby yourself, said Tom. And so the argument began all over again and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them and boil them next time. Who shall we sit on first? Said the voice. Better sit on the last fella first, said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by thawing. He thought Tom was talking. Don't talk to yourself, said Tom, but if he wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he? The one with the yellow stockings, said Bert.
Nonsense. The one with the grey stockings,
said a voice like William's. I made sure it were yellow, said Bert.
Yellow it was,
said William. Then what did you say you were grey for? Said Bert.
I never did. Tom said it.
That I never did, said Tom. It was you. 2-1. So shut your mouth, said Bert.
Who are you talking to?
Said William. Now stop it, said Tom and Bert together. The night's getting on, and the dawn comes early. Let's get on with it.
Don't take you all, and be stoned to you,
said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't, for just at that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stopped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the bird perch on them, for trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again. That is what happened to Bert and Tom and William. Excellent, said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb out of a thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarrelling until the light came and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket picking, said Bomber, when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have got of those fellows without a struggle, in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you are wasting time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it. They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came out on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incarnations. Would this be any good? Asked Bilbo, when they were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight. He held out a largish key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air, but there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls,
I am afraid they belonged to victims. Among them were several swords of various shapes and sizes. Two caught my eyes particularly because of their beautiful scabbards and jewelled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was good as a short sword for a hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them and looking at them curiously. "They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts, but when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them."
"Let's get out of this horrible smell,"
said Philly. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat, also one barrel of ale which was still full. By that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had got from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese, and plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies, and carried away the pots of gold, and buried them secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them just in case they ever had a chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more, and jogged along again on the path towards the east.
"Where did you go to, if I may ask?"
said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," said he.
"And what brought you back in the nick of time?"
"Looking behind," said he.
"Exactly," said Thorin. "But could you be more plain?"
"I went on to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell." "Where's that?" asked Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they waylaid strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3, A Short Rest.